couple of data points that are out there. Republicans are now favored to win back the Senate. We know Republicans are a big favorite in the House. And to me, this explains why there is such panic among Democrats out there and why they are going after Herschel Walker to such an extent. Because remember when everybody was telling you Dr. Oz was done, Pennsylvania was a win for John Fetterman? 26 days out from the Senate election, Pennsylvania is now an absolute dead heat. It's going to come down to a few thousand votes potentially, one way or the other. I also think there is a possibility that Dr. Oz, over the next 26 days, is going to actually run away with this race because all of the health-related concerns that exist out there for John Fetterman are coming to the forefront. There was an NBC interview that we played you some cuts from yesterday that was such a disaster for Fetterman, so positive for Dr. Oz, that Democrats are now arguing that it's unfair to consider health-related issues for John Fetterman, who's recovering from a stroke, who cannot speak, who doesn't have the physical ability to actually do the job. And this has become a real issue because if Democrats can't win in Pennsylvania, there's no state out there where they have a chance to flip a seat. North Carolina's not going to happen. Ohio's not going to happen. We had J.D. Vance on yesterday. He's pulled away. They have to win in Pennsylvania to have any hope of retaining their Senate majority. Well, this is kind of crazy. I want to play a couple of cuts from you to give you an illustration of how desperate they now are to defend John Fetterman's collapsing candidacy. And let's start with this one. Trevor Noah, who has never been successful on The Daily Show and has now announced that he is going to be leaving that show, compared John Fetterman to politicians who are disabled war veterans. Listen.
I'm not vouching for Fetterman over Dr. Oz or anything like that, but I do think this whole debate is veering into the territory of saying that people with disabilities cannot be lawmakers, which is trash, all right? Especially since America already has disabled lawmakers serving right now. It shouldn't be disqualified, right? Dan Crenshaw is missing an eye. Tammy Duckworth lost both her legs, right? And Mitch McConnell, he's literally melting all the time.
Okay, I mean, first, obviously he's not funny, but Clay, I mean, his analysis is trash, and everyone knows. Everyone's sitting here saying this. You know, sometimes you do wonder. You think, is he honestly just so not smart that he doesn't understand the difference between, of course, if someone, first of all, there's the honor that we as a society bestow on anybody who has war wounds, rightly so. But just put aside that component of this, comparing that, you know, having a stroke is a very sad thing that happens to people. It's not getting hit by shrapnel in Iraq or Afghanistan or being hit by enemy rounds. Okay, we understand that difference. But also, of course, you can be a lawmaker if you're in a wheelchair because you're paralyzed or because you're missing a leg or because, you know, missing an eye doesn't mean your brain doesn't work. Do we really have to go? We have to go through this?
Yeah, I think we have to make these analogies.
Disability is different from, you know, I can't run the 100-meter dash anymore, and we all understand that, right? But what is he saying here?
Well, I think it's a sign of the desperation. And you're right. Losing an eye doesn't mean that you can't be an incredible congressperson. But there is a necessity that you have the physical and mental capabilities to represent your state in the Senate. And I've said for a long time, as you have you, Buck, John Fetterman's political opinions should disqualify him from winning in Pennsylvania. But the combination of his Bernie Sanders clone left-wing political opinions with the fact, which is true, that he is not able to communicate is a disqualifying function to me for Pennsylvania voters. And look, if you are disabled, if you are picking a 400-meter relay team, If somebody had a broken leg, you wouldn't put them on the relay team because they can't run. That's not being ableist. It's saying in order to do the job of being a sprinter, your leg probably cannot be broken and allow you to run at the fastest possible speed. Well, John Fetterman is not healthy enough to be a senator. It should be disqualifying. Buck, if he had been honest with the people of Pennsylvania about the stroke that he had a few days before the Democrat primary, I think there is a very good chance that he would not have been the nominee. If he had been honest in May and June after having that stroke and said, I am not healthy enough to do this job, then they would have selected another Democrat, put them in this race, and they would have been able to run against Dr. Oz. Democrats didn't do that. And as a result, they're now aware that they are in trouble in this race, and so they have basically put up the bat signal, and they are bringing out everything they can to try and defend John Fetterman. I want to play this from CNN yesterday. They even brought in Sanjay Gupta, okay, their doctor. Their requisite COVID is going to kill everyone doctor who said everything needs to be shut down and got embarrassed, frankly, on Joe Rogan.
Has he apologized for being wrong about everything on COVID? I don't think so.
Remember when he went on Joe Rogan and Joe Rogan just absolutely filleted him over many of the things that he was saying about COVID? So Dr. Sanjay Gupta is now being brought in. Now, remember, this is important. CNN spent years telling all of us that Donald Trump was not mentally capable of being president and that they needed to invoke the 25th Amendment to remove him from office.
They said he was crazy, like literally crazy, as in out of his mind. You know, would be able to run an insanity defense in court, kind of crazy. That was the basis of it.
They spent years on that. So the idea now that they would suddenly say, "Oh, questioning somebody's ability to hold office is beneath you." Or beneath our political discourse is laughably absurd. But I just want you to recognize out there, because I'm sure many of you did not see this, this is how desperate they are in this Fetterman campaign to try to make him the victim. Listen to John King and Sanjay Gupta on CNN defending Fetterman.
You're a brain surgeon. You understand this space better than just about anybody out there watching. Explain what you saw when you watched that interview, the questions or the answers it gave you.
Yeah, it's really interesting because you really get insight into how a stroke can affect a particular part of the brain and how people can recover from that as well. Let me just show you here. And again, this is really interesting, but this is a brain model. Left side of the brain is typically where people have speech sort of reside in their brains. And speech means your ability to speak and write, but also to understand spoken and written words. It's all referred to as speech. What you see is he seems to have difficulty hearing spoken word and processing that. So as a result, that's located here in this part of the brain. But back here is where you have your visual part of your brain. He seems to be able to read the words, understand them, and then respond. Sometimes he might mash up a word or two. That's how he described it. But what I think is so important, John, is that when we think about strokes, a lot of times people commingle what is a functional deficit, auditory hearing processing problem, with cognition. He does not appear to have a problem with cognition. You know, he's responding quickly. He supposedly took a couple of tests where he performed well on those tests. We haven't seen the results of that. We haven't seen any of these medical records. But overall, you could hear his fluency of speech and things like that. So not to commingle cognition with functional deficit that people do recover from in the form of this stroke.
Okay, so he's basically trying to say it's purely a motor skills issue, not a firing of the synapses inside the brain that allows for understanding, decision-making, the different, parts of the cortex that allow that kind of processing to take place. But notice how he also goes, but they won't release the medical records, so
yes,
there's that.
They are bringing out every possible step they can to try to win this race. And Fetterman is now trying to argue that he is the victim. He sent out a tweet yesterday talking about the fact that that Dr. Oz was making an issue for his health. And again, this is where they are trying to steal this seat for a guy who is not able to do the job. And Dr. Oz, we had him on, was it this week, Buck? I think we had Dr. Oz on Here's Dr. Oz saying what I think is true. The voters do deserve better.
Here we are, less than a month before the election, and I've been asking John Fetterman to answer questions on the campaign trail. Initially, he wasn't even on the campaign trail for the first couple months. But answer questions from voters, answer questions from reporters while you're actually campaigning. That's what we normally do in a democracy. And the concern, of course, is that if you don't ever leave your home and answer questions, we don't know the answers to the questions you're asking. But I don't think there's closed captioning on the floor of the Senate. And maybe he doesn't need closed captioning when he's actually moving around. But maybe he does. Again, a lot of question marks, and voters deserve better.
I mean, he's right.
Do you remember when the media tried to make Trump's weight part of the issue as well? They're like, oh, he's obese. He can't do the job because of all the health. That didn't last very long, but there was a period there where Trump's weight became a fixation of the media as well, too. They're like, oh, look at this, his BMI. They would talk. I mean, look, I remember because of CNN, they would talk about this stuff. The thing is, everybody, I know it's dizzying, but you just have to start from this basic premise. The libs have no principles.
Yes.
When you understand they have no principles, they just want to win. They want their emotional validation. They want their choices to be what are made by the apparatus of government. That's it. Their preferences enshrined through the force of government. That's all. That is the only principle. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, of course this makes sense. Trump needs the 25th Amendment, but John Fetterman's just fine. He's almost like a war hero. Well, when you realize they have no principles, it all holds together.
Well, this is what Fetterman tweeted this morning tying into this, Buck. In the Senate, I'll fight for the millions of Americans who, like me, aren't perfectly healthy. All Dr. Oz has ever done is exploit them. First of all, I don't even understand what that means, because how has Dr. Oz exploited anyone? I mean, he's been a doctor his whole life. He's treated people. But we notice where the pivot here has happened. For a long time, John Fetterman's people said, Fetterman's fine. He's completely healthy. You guys are making up all these health-related conditions. Now he's pivoted to, I'm a victim. I'm not healthy. Most Americans aren't healthy either. That's his campaign pitch? Like, this is not good. It's not right. And I think it's why, one of many reasons, Dr. Oz is going to end up winning.